get everything working so you guys can see his presentation. He's been doing stuff with games for a very long time. He is working with
The Engine Co. is my company.
Engine Co. And we talk about networking for games. Lots of stuff going on here that we could not do with this little crappy computer. So pay attention. I'm giving it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will. Appreciate it. So like Will said, I'm Ben. I'm from a company called The Engine Company. You can go to theengine.co or loomsdk.com to learn more about what we do. But today I'm going to be talking about networking. So I've been doing games since like 2002 professionally, which is an increasingly long time. Coming to this event, I'm starting to realize that I've like survived. I've become an older dog in the industry, which is a weird feeling. I remember when I was the youngest guy in the room all the time. So look out, youngest guys in the room. I started out at a company called Garage Games, which we sold the Torque game engine, and we had the opportunity to license a lot of tech to a lot of indie game developers, and we helped launch sort of the ability for people to be indies. You know, before Garage Games, it was difficult to be an indie. You couldn't get technology for cheap. You couldn't easily create pro games, and so we really made it our mission to promote that and allow indies to get big. And at the same time, a lot of other companies did the same thing, and so we were able to be part of that, which is really cool. So my code was used in a ton of different games, and I got the experience of seeing it break and work and problems people ran into. And one of the heritages of Garage Games is it came out of a company called Dynamics that did a lot of simulation and network games, Tribes among them. And so they had a really fantastic networking tech, and so I got a chance to learn from some of the guys that built that, as well as build a library myself that I worked on called TNL. And we put that out on the market. It was used in some different titles. And since then, networking has kind of been a passion of mine. So I thought, why not take the opportunity to talk about it? It's something that, you know, if you've played Minecraft, if you've played Counter-Strike, if you've played TF2, if you've do your Call of Duty or your Halo or anything like that, you've experienced it. It's a big part of the gaming experience for a lot of people. You know, it's sort of what allows social gaming to happen. And so, you know, my goal basically is to tell you guys as much as you want to know about networking. I can go super, super technical if you want to go super, super technical. I can go super high level. If you want to go high level, I have examples, I have visualizations, I have the ability to draw pictures because that can be an aid to understanding. And so that's kind of my plan for the next hour-ish. Can everybody see the screen okay? I know it's tiny. Hopefully that will make my presentation seem adorable. And if it doesn't, then I apologize. So I'll probably look at it from time to time just to make sure it's still there. So I guess first off, I'd like to get to know you guys a little bit. You know, who here is involved in making games? Awesome, you're brave, okay. Who here is just into games and curious about how they work? Okay, good. So there's like 2 people I think that didn't raise their hand for either, so good luck. Yeah, you. So who here is more on the programming side and more on the art side? Okay, cool. So artists, I'll do my best to make this accessible to you. I'm not going to get into any actual code. It's all just going to be sort of pictures and high-level explanations, because if we get into code, then we'll be here all day. So, you know, I actually have a nice slide deck that I built a little while ago, and so I'm just going to pull that up, because I think that'll be a pretty good fit for what we're doing today. And I'm going to do this, which means I have to turn around and do this. And actually, no, maybe not. Let's see. Awesome. Okay, good. So, all right. So this is a talk I gave a few years ago, and I sort of updated a little bit, and it kind of gets into a lot of the different parts of a networking system and why it's interesting. And so I'll kind of start by talking a little bit about some different scenarios that come up when you're networking games, how those can be problematic, and why my slide deck is playing itself. I'm not totally sure. We're going to stop that. It wants to get going. It knows we're behind. So yeah, here we go. So this, all right. Kind of give you guys a sense of the scenarios and the issues that are problematic for game devs. And so we can kind of go from there. Okay, so suppose you're playing your favorite game and you want to go and connect to a server. So what actually happens when that happens? Because this gets us right into why networking is terrible to begin with. So There we go. Cool. So you get into the game, and you start playing, and your guy goes. Is he going? Go. All right. So you get playing. OK, that happens, and then this happens, and then you die. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience playing an online game. Yeah. So that happens, and it really. This talk is about how to avoid that. So. You have to have a certain minimum level of networking ability if you're going to have a network game at all for your game to work. And if you're playing something like World of Warcraft, like maybe high performance isn't the biggest deal, but you want to save your bytes and you want to give people a good experience. So, what are the sorts of things that are important? Well, you need to have a system that's really robust. You need to have a system that's really efficient, and you need to have a system that's really responsive, because networks are basically defined by being broken all the time. So you just assume everything will fail, and kind of like if it works, good on you. You want to be efficient because for every player that has a really fast connection, there's somebody who's on Quest who has a really bad connection and are not really going to be able to play your game. So you want to be able to fit into the most constrained environment you can. And then you want to be responsive. It's easy to write a network experience that feels bad, where you hit the button and then the guy moves a little later, or you shoot at somebody and it looks like you should hit, but you missed, stuff like that. And people don't like that. It turns them off from the game, and they're not going to play it. So we're going to talk about some ways to avoid that. Networking is kind of at its best if it's invisible. So stuff I've worked on, I did Torque Network Library, which had some success. And then I also got into social games and did a lot of like web-based stuff. And so that was kind of an interesting thing. So we'll talk very briefly about that. Cool. So let's talk about the server. This is the server, not there, but here. And the server is going to send packets out over the wire. And some of those packets will make it, and some of them won't. We're going to skip this slide and go right into some examples. There's a couple broad ways to send data over the internet. You can send data by UDP or TCP. And so the difference between the two is, with UDP, I just send data out, and if it gets there, great, and no one really tries very hard to make sure it arrives, and I don't really get told if it doesn't show up. So it seems kind of scary, but that's actually how the internet works. Everything sort of works at that level. Now, suppose you want to have the fiction that actually it's a stable connection and data's not going to get lost, and if I send hello to someone, hello will show up on the other end for sure, or I'll find out if it didn't. Then there's a protocol called TCP. And TCP, the guarantee stuff will show up, but it has a lot of overhead because the operating system sits there and sort of shepherds the data and makes sure it gets where it needs to go. And that has a lot of overhead. If a piece of data gets lost, it's not going to deliver the rest of the data until that piece of data shows up again, which means that you're going to be sitting there waiting for stuff to happen, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, however long, and then the gameplay will kind of resume from there. So it's really not suitable for real-time play. So what a lot of games do is they build their own protocol on top of UDP. And so I call that the notify protocol. There's a lot of different names for it. And so what that basically means is they just spam data out all the time. And if some of it gets lost, no big deal, because they're resending stuff and making sure that it kind of gets over the wire in a sensible way. So let's talk about how that actually works in the game a little bit, and then I'll get into some examples. So talk about changing the color of the sky. So suppose I want to change the color of the sky, so I have the server here. She's thinking about the world. She says, actually, the sky is purple now. OK, great. And we have the client. He still thinks the sky is blue, right? Nobody told him it's different, so he's just going to kind of keep assuming that as long as the game is running. So how does data get over the wire? Well, what happens is the server is going to send a note out over the wire. They're going to send a packet over the network. It's addressed to the guy, to the client, and he's going to get the packet. He's going to read it, and when he reads the packet's going to say, hey, by the way, the sky's purple now, so let's get on that. And so then his notion of the world is going to change. And so that's kind of the basic idea behind all game networking, and all game networking is kind of more or less refined versions of that basic concept. But things can go wrong because the internet is a big, scary place, and it's populated by squids, which in this case are standing in for routers and all the sorts of machinery that exists between me here and then someone on the other end of the internet somewhere else. And so maybe they just lose stuff. Like maybe they're feeling apathetic. Maybe somebody's torrenting something in your apartment. Maybe somebody kicks a cable and something gets unplugged. Data gets lost. It happens. So what happens? Well, each protocol handles it differently. In the case of UDP, it's gone. The end. In the case of TCP, the operating system will deal with it. So the operating system will buffer the data, and it'll check to see if it got received, and then it'll send it, and each operating system will do it a little bit differently, and none of them really are optimized for efficiency in this, so they, at least time efficiency, so they'll kind of hold on to the data for a while and then eventually resend it, and meanwhile, maybe the sky has changed color again to green, and you're sitting there waiting for blue to show up, which is kind of a waste of time at that point. So instead, you can sort of do more intricate stuff. So rather than getting into the next part of this talk, which involves a whole lot of there we go. A whole lot of complicated numbers, which I feel is probably not what people are interested in at this time. I'm just going to go back to mirroring, if I can find it. And I'm going to show you some cool stuff. So, is that still showing up okay? Awesome. Great. So, first off, let me give you a little example of constrained bandwidth. And apparently Steam has to control my computer, so that's great. It can control my computer. Thanks. Okay. Great. So Blockland is a game that is actually developed by our very own Eric Hartman right here. Look out, Eric.
Right now when it fails, everyone is playing.
Yep. And it'll probably work. If it doesn't, though, it's his fault. But I helped a lot with the networking and physics and a bunch of other stuff. And so I just wanted to show you kind of some interesting things about the networking on this game. And so I'm going to run it locally because conference internet is really not the best. But it's going to demonstrate some concepts really well. So hopefully you guys can sort of see what's going on and see everything work. So Blockland is a game where you build bricks. And so you can place them, and you can move them around, and you can build different things, and then also you have a jetpack, because jetpacks are fun. You're a little Lego guy. So you should all go on Steam and buy it right away. It's a really cool little game. But one of the interesting things that happens is when you have a server up on the internet, people will build things out of millions of bricks or hundreds of thousands of bricks or whatever, which is really, it's a lot of data. There's a lot of bricks they can be deleted and destroyed. They can have their color changed. They can interact with things in an interesting way. And then at the same time, there's also players running around. And so the problem you have is, how do you, if I connect to a server with 100,000 bricks that is some big house or something, how do I get that to transfer? And so the answer is that I do it in pieces. So for instance, if I go and I load, what's a good one? Pyramid, that's probably a good one, huh? With a bedroom, that'll be good. That'll probably run okay, right? Yeah, damn it. So you can see that what's happening is it's loading in pieces. And so actually on the server, all the bricks have already loaded. But what's happening is they're coming in over the network, one packet at a time. So it fits as many bricks as it can into a packet, and then it sends them, and off you go. So in this case, I think, I don't know how many bricks we have. OK, I'm glad I remember that command. So there was 30,000 bricks. And so that came in pretty quick. And then you can go and you can load other stuff. I like to load the Arch of Constantine and different things that people have made. And so being able to synchronize the state of all these bricks is actually really challenging, because you have to analyze the whole state of the world from the perspective of each client. You have to identify what things they do and don't know, which when they start, they know nothing. So then you're sort of telling them about the world as you go. And then as you roll forward, you're saying, OK, here's each brick description, and you send that in a packet, basically, and then you're compressing it, and you're prioritizing it, and getting it over the wire. And so these are sort of the things that are happening in the background as the game runs. And one of the nice things about Blockland is, because there's so many bricks, you can actually see that happening kind of as you go. Who here's played Minecraft? Right. So with Minecraft, you join a server, you see the same thing, right? You see all the little chunks of the world come in, and all the pieces sort of come together, and that's how the world is synchronized. And when you destroy a brick or something, and then that gets sent to everyone else. And so that's sort of the basic idea of game networking, that you're running the simulation and sending state. So as you get into it, you sort of have to deal with a couple of different things. So one example is, if I connected to a server on the internet that has somebody's build, and I'm downloading all these blocks, some of those packets might get lost, which is something I've alluded to a number of times. And so what you have to do is, every time you send a packet, you will keep track of what's in that packet. And if it gets lost, then you will have to look at your notes and sort of say, oh, OK, this is what was in that packet. I need to resend it now. But on top of that, you might also want to prioritize. So you might want to say, bricks are important, but if there's a rocket coming at me, that I really want to like make sure the player sees that before the rocket hits them. And so as you're transferring data, you're sort of constantly sorting and saying, okay, what's the most important thing? And you're putting that in first and sending that data at highest priority so that things can go. Now, you compare that to a web page. When I go to a web page, I pull down the web page and it says, here are the 10 images on this web page, and I download those off the server, and then everything shows up. The web page isn't constantly changing as I'm playing, running scrolling up and down the page. At least most of the time it's not. And the guys who do that work really hard to make it work. Whereas with a game, that's kind of the default state. So that's kind of, a little bit of the update piece. So I want to show you a different game to get into a little more detail about updates and how those kind of work. So how's this going for people? Am I going too technical? Am I not technical enough? Does anyone really want to get into bits?
How do you deal with conflicts? Like, I mean, in Blockline specifically, like you load in a whole bunch of blocks at once, and something's already there. What happens?
What do we do, Eric?
It does whatever the server tells it to.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if the server decides to want one brick in one place, then you get one brick in one place.
Yeah. But we try hard to prevent that. So actually what happens, like in the case where I loaded Constantine over the bedroom, if you went down and looked at the bottom of Constantine, it would the bricks that intersected with existing bricks wouldn't be there. So it would just skip them to avoid being in a weird state where you have like things, stacked on top of other things. Yeah, hey, why don't you launch, buddy? I would like that if you did. Or not, whatever. It's not like anyone's ever played Counter-Strike before. Any other questions while I'm fighting with this?
We can talk about some of the optimizations we did for the brick packing.
Like the histograms?
That is
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. Oh, wait. Okay. Interesting.
Also, just like, rotation is only 2 bits or whatever.
Yeah. So one of the things. Oh, I see. It's waiting for Blockland to shut down. So one of the things that's really interesting about sending data over the network is the most data that you can really send at once is about 1,400 bytes. So that's a packet, right? And the reason for that size is that you have to send it all the way through the internet, right? So when you do that, it's going to get handled by a bunch of routers. I send it through my cable modem. My cable modem sends it somewhere else. That goes to some router on the internet. That goes over a fiber optic cable under an ocean to some dude in England, and the dude in England gets it over his modem, and then he runs it on his laptop, and all this stuff happens. And so each guy is passing the data along as it goes. And so they only have so much space for each packet. So you can send a packet that's 60,000 bytes if you want. But what is going to happen is it's going to get fragmented and busted up, and parts may not show up. It may not show up at all. It may be truncated. All kinds of weird stuff can happen. So for reals, this is what we're doing. That's awesome. There we go. So what you have to do is you have to fit stuff into 1,400 bytes. And so the problem you can run into is you want to sort of fit as many updates in as you can. So you really want to compress it as tightly as possible. And if you don't compress it as tightly as possible, then what happens is updates come in slower. So in the case of Blockland, when we started Blockland, like optimizing it, I don't know, how big was a block? Like 150, 200 bits? Yeah, but it was quite a few bits. I mean, it was like 200 bits. So, that's 200 bits is going to be 40 bytes or something. So now all of a sudden it's like maybe you can fit, like 30 bricks in an update in a packet. And, when you're only sending like 10 packets a second, then your 30,000 brick build is going to take a long time to download. And people get bored, they stop playing, they go on their way. So what we did is we started analyzing how that data was sent. And so we got pretty deep into it. And so we ended up looking at like, okay, when you send bricks, how's rotation stored? And so I think originally we had some large number that was sent, like a floating point number that was like, here's the rotation. And well, bricks only they're always like aligned, right? Like you don't have one at 45 degrees, at least in Blockland you don't. So it turns out you can send 2 bits instead of like maybe 10. And for position, a lot of times the bricks are close to the user when they come in. And for positions that are close to the user, you can use fewer bits to encode those. So instead of sending like a 32-bit position, you can send a 10-bit position, and it still all works and goes in the right place. So we sat down and we did all this sort of optimization and analysis of the data and looked really closely at it because it was such a common case in the game. And we're able to sit there and reduce, I don't know, what's the average brick update size now? Yeah, like so 70 bits. So we like cut it in half. So now you can get twice as many bricks per packet, which makes the whole game feel way faster. If you haven't played Kerbal Space Program, you should. Okay, awesome. So this will actually work now. And similarly, there's other common cases that you optimize for. You look for where when you're building game networking, you look for what is the most common thing that's going to happen, and then you try to make that take as little data as possible because you want to send those updates as much fidelity as you can, and as frequently as you can. So every game is going to have a little slightly different focus on its networking because of that. If you're doing a pure FPS, it's going to be all about how players are moving, which is something I'm going to show you in a second here. If it's a building game, it's going to be all about the environment and synchronizing that as efficiently. And so if you're playing Blockland, the networking is pretty good for the first-person part, but it's not as polished and solid feeling as like a Quake or Call of Duty. It's a little bit, in my opinion, as a professional network guy or whatever, it's a little bit floatier feeling. It's a little less tight. Although it's pretty good. Because it has to do this other huge problem right at the same time, and so you kind of pay a price for that. So we're going to pick on a bot here. If you feel bad for bots, then you might want to avert your eyes. Counter-Strike, for instance. I mean, like 90% of the networking is to make sure that when you shoot a gun at, shoot a bullet at somebody, then they're moving, and it looked like it should hit them on your screen when you fired the bullet, that you actually will. And it turns out that sounds really simple, but it's actually incredibly complicated to do right. Okay, so I'm going to be, terrorist, Arctic Avenger, awesome. Okay, so, come on. No clip, and let's turn on the entity report. So there's all sorts of neat commands in Counter-Strike that are of various levels of interest. But it's really interesting to see what's going on. So I don't know if you can see like the million little boxes there. But those are all the things that are networked right now. So every object in the world that's networked has a little box in that chart. And if you looked really closely, you're certainly welcome to come up and look at it if you want, since the monitor's so small. There's little bars, like there's a little red bar right there. So if I sit here and oh, hey, it's a bot. Goodbye, bot. If I go here and if you see when I'm moving around, I don't know if you can see up there, that bar is filling up. And if I turn and move at the same time, it actually even fills up more. And the reason for that is it's showing how much data is being sent for that object's network updates at that point in time. So you can actually sit there and watch this, and you can get an idea of where things are happening in the game and what sorts of things are going on in the world as it's going on. So actually, I don't know if you can see right now, but C weapon USP just came up high on the list because the bot is shooting at me. I don't know where he went. There he is, somewhere. I don't know. And if I start shooting back, you'll see that now my weapon Glock is spiking up. And so what Source does is it keeps track of all these objects. It keeps really close track of all the data that changes about them. And so as things happen in the game world, it notes that and says, okay, I'm going to send 20 bits to describe this change. I'm going to spend 10 bits to describe this change, and it streams all that stuff along the way. Another thing that's really important is it only sends data that is relevant. So if you look somewhere around here, these things change to orange. So these are all the objects in the world that it sort of knows exists, but for me as a client, but I can't see right now. I can't see them or hear them. And so as a result, it's not going to send any updates. And so if I start flying around the world, you can see that the list of things is changing. And so that's because as I'm moving, different things are coming in and out of scope for me and becoming relevant to send network updates. So if there was a big battle on the opposite side of the map, they would all be in these orange objects, and I would never see any updates for it. And so that's a big part of how it keeps things efficient, because if it just sat there and sent me the updates for every single object in the world all the time, it would be just a huge amount of data for stuff I never even saw. Worst of all, doing that allows cheating. Because if you're connected to a server and the server is saying, hey, by the way, the guy on the other side of the map is turning around and shooting like this, then that's just like an invitation for you to sit there and write a program that'll pull that data out of the network stream and plot it for you. Yeah?
So then when people are wall hacking and stuff and seeing people that are outside of what their client can view as receiving updates, right?
They
have some way to put those objects somehow into their client's field of view or whatever, so that the server is sending them updates to those objects' positions.
Yeah, so that's a great question and point. So what's happening there is, there's a trade-off of time and quality. So if I wanted to really be super uptight about what you could see and not see, I could do a whole bunch of analysis on every object all the time and say, okay, like you can't actually see this guy because he's doing this and he's behind a corner here, and so you can't see him. But that's a lot of work. I don't want to spend all the time that the server has just sitting there thinking about how people's body parts are positioned and if they're behind walls or not relative to every other player. So what I do is instead, like in the case of Source, I divide the world up into zones. So like a hallway is a zone, and a door is a zone, and a courtyard is a zone, and so I have all these like different regions. And so I just categorize based on what region you're in, whether I can see that region or not. So I kind of do a broader categorization of the world, and when I do that, then that's what determines what gets sent. So because doing it all one-off could be really expensive. Sure. So that's why if somebody's right around the corner, you can probably see them with a wall hack, because they're close enough that the game needs to know where they are to do sounds for them, and like if their gun barrel sticks out around the corner, it needs to do that, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of a fudge factor, and I believe they've adjusted that over the years in the face of cheating. And some games are super strict, some aren't. There's a trade-off. Like if you play Minecraft is super liberal. Like it doesn't really, it's not designed. Counter-Strike is sort of designed that that they think people will probably try to wall hack it and do all kinds of bad stuff to it. Like no one sits around wall hacking Minecraft. Like there's an option in the debug menu to just do that as part of the game. Like if that's what you want to do, like go nuts, right? And so like it just sends everything all the time basically for the region that you're in, and it just sort of filters by like a certain number of chunks away from you, a certain number of blocks. And Blockland kind of does a hybrid. It does have some notion of zoning, but for the most part, it just sort of brute forces it, and it just gives more priority to guys who are closer. So if you want to wall hack Blockland, I guess go for it. For all your competitive Blockland needs. I guess the counter-terrorist win. Okay, so that's a pretty cool thing. It's a lot of text. I guess if you were really hardcore, you'd play the game that way and feel smug. I would like to show you one other thing from this. So one of the big things that's really mind-bending and confusing about networking is it takes time to go from one place to another, even when you're a photon. If I have a fiber optic link or I'm sending stuff over Wi-Fi or whatever, even like right now I'm connected to a hotspot on my phone, or I was, even to go from here to here takes a tiny, tiny fraction of a second, right? And when you're talking about like, oh, I want to, shoot my buddy in Budapest or something, I mean, then it, could be 50 milliseconds, could be 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second. And so when you're playing a game like Counter-Strike and dudes are whizzing by at high speed and you want to shoot them or interact with them in some way, it becomes really important that everybody agree on where everybody else is. And it turns out that in the face of that kind of relatively slow communication, it's very challenging to do that. And so there's a lot of really interesting things that you do to compensate for that. So the simple example that I'll give here, and then maybe we'll talk really quickly about a complicated one, if I can find my friend the bot. He's been so faithful trying to kill me, yet when I need him, I can't find him. Where are you, you ingrate? Anybody see him? Oh, that's a good idea. Wait, I think somebody, why is it blinking? Is that because I can plant the bomb now? Who knows how to play Counter-Strike? Okay. All right, so now we have a short period of time to try to find him. Because I would like to get into a shooting war here. There we are, okay, cool. So notice what happened when I shot at him. You see how there's like a red and a blue outline? And he's gonna shoot at me probably in a second here. Or maybe he doesn't feel like it, whatever. So what's happening here, what those two things are, is it's showing where I thought I was and where the server thought I was when the shot hit. Because what's happening is, in this case, it's all running on the same computer, so in theory there's no delay. But if I'm playing, say I'm playing on my favorite server that's based in Chicago, there's going to be a millisecond delay each way. So if I say shoot, it's going to take 30 milliseconds for that to get to the server. And then when the server tells me what happened, that's going to be another 30 milliseconds back. So right there I have a 60 millisecond delay. In addition, if I'm playing, say, against my friend Eric, he's also operating at a 30 millisecond delay. So if I shoot at him on the server, I'm shooting it where I thought he was 30 milliseconds in the past, and he's going to see the result 60 milliseconds from now, as will I, and we're all moving all at the same time as we do that. So when you're talking about like trying to shoot somebody with an insta-hit weapon where it instantly, does damage based on where you aimed, this becomes a really big deal. Oh, I died. And if you start thinking about it, it gets really mind-bending because you have to sort of go backwards in time to make stuff work out right. So suppose that I have a guy running across the room, left to right, right? And I have my gun, and I'm going to take aim, and I'm going to shoot him as he goes across. So pow, I take a shot at him. By the time the server knows that I've shot, he's already moved out of the way of the bullet. So in order to have the game be playable, because it's very frustrating to play a game where you take a shot at somebody or interact with them in some way, and they end up really being somewhere else, and you miss all the time, right? Like a guy's running down a hallway, you can't shoot him because actually you need to shoot where he'd be in the future. So what this game does, and other games do as well, is they actually rewind time. So that's what the red and the blue boxes are about, is when I take a shot at somebody, so if I go find my buddy here, actually maybe I'll just spawn some more bots, because that's fun. Okay, so now I should be able to find some bots probably. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so if I'm moving back and forth and they shoot at me, do you see how the red and the blue are pretty separated? So the red is where the server is actually rewinding time. So it's saying basically like I was at where the blue guy was when the shot happened, but the server had to rewind to this point in time to process the interaction to then apply the effect backwards. And so this explains a couple of weird things that'll happen in games like this. Like I don't know if you've ever had the experience that you've been hiding around a corner and you've popped out to see what's going on, then you hide again, and then shortly after you finish hiding again, you die. So I can tell the guys who are really serious about their games, because not everybody notices this. That's because when you popped out, somebody saw you and shot at you and killed you, but it all happened before the server could tell you. So when you came back and hid, what you saw is you hop out, look around, hop back, no problem. What happened on the server and what the other guy saw is he saw somebody hop out, he killed them, they were dead. So what happens is you get that update a little after you finished your movement. So you got killed in the past, and the effects are only coming to fruition now in the present. And so then, of course, you feel frustrated because like, hey, I was behind cover, how did I get killed? But that's how things go when you're bending time. And so there's a lot of really interesting things that happen as a result of that in games like this. And so Counter-Strike actually spends a lot of its time when a server is running, sitting there and thinking about like, okay, where were people a second ago? Where was this guy half a second ago? Like, let's rewind time and see where things are. And so it gets even worse if you're doing like a racing game, because with a racing game, you have two objects that are moving at extremely high speed, and they can like ram into each other or push each other around. And so it gets really challenging to sort of have the right thing happen, because if you're a little bit off, if the server predicts a little bit off, then what you see is everything's jumping around all the time. But if you get it right, it's totally smooth and awesome. And so you sort of have to do all this constant like rewind and play forward and rewind and play forward as packets come in and stuff to make things work. And so that's something that a lot of games that are more fast action will do to make things kind of play smoothly. Like Minecraft actually doesn't do it because there aren't that many high-speed interactions in it. But like Call of Duty, Halo, and Counter-Strike, TF2, those kinds of games will do that sort of thing. So does that make sense at all, or is that totally mind-bending and like, okay, cool, great. That's awesome. Okay, so that's that example. So now I'm going to look at my notes. And you're going to look at my notes too. Yeah, okay. So then one of the other things that's really powerful is, let's see. Yeah, so this is all basically the same stuff, and then we have the bit stream. So the bit stream is kind of fun, I guess. I don't know, maybe we don't really want to go into the bit stream. Networking your simulation. Yeah, okay, so that's exciting. So that's kind of more of the same stuff. So that's basically I've covered the major things that you run into in your doing game networking at a really high level. So one of the things that'll happen is, to describe the whole state of the game world can take a lot of data. You know, even with Counter-Strike, I mean, you have 16, 32 players. Each of them has ammo. They have different inventory. They can be doing different animations. They can do all kinds of stuff. You also have what's going on here? You also have you know, games like Blockland. Each brick has a ton of properties. It can be emitting smoke. It can be playing music. It can do all kinds of stuff, and that can be really bandwidth consuming as well. You know, to send all that data all the time is really costly. So what a lot of these games do is they will keep track of what you already know about the world. So as the server is communicating with a client, it starts out with the client knowing basically nothing about the world. You know, you assume the client knows nothing, and then you start telling it, okay, there's a guy here, we're in this level, this is how the geometry is shaped, here's all the different things that are going on. And as you do that, you build up a shared knowledge about the world, which is really powerful. So you build up this knowledge, and so eventually you reach a point where you don't need to send a full update when something happens. You know, for example, suppose you're playing Quake. Who here plays Quake? Okay, so the same guys who know about latency. I'm seeing a trend here. So you know, Quake is a game you run around, you shoot stuff. There's power-ups, right? I mean, and they show up on a schedule. They always show up in the same place, and it's important to know where they are. But other than that, they really don't change at all. They're always the same type. You know, they always have the same delay, and so if you think about it, you really don't need a lot of information to say what they're doing. You know, maybe you only need like a bit, which is, was it picked up or not? And then maybe like a little bit of information about when it shows up again, if that's important for the game. And beyond that, you don't really have to send a lot more. Now, when you first start, you might have to say, okay, it's at such and such a position, and it's this kind of power up, and you know, all that kind of stuff. But you know, once you're kind of up and going, you don't need all that. So what a lot of games do is they'll do what's called delta encoding, which is basically they know what you know, and then they just send you updates as you go along. And so in the case of the power up, it might send 1 bit instead of, you know, the whole enchilada at 60 or 70 or 100 bits. Or in the case of a player, the first time you see a player, it might tell you, you know, what skin they have and what their name is and who they are and what, you know, special items they have on them and everything else. But then from then on, it may only say, okay, he rotated a little to the left. Now he's looking over this way. You know, little updates that might just take a few bits. And so that's a really big way of how games give a better networked experience, because you know, the more information you can cram into a single packet, the better the game is going to play. The more rich the experience can be. You know, if you're just sending everything all the time, good luck. You know, maybe the game world updates once a second. But if you can send it one update, a full update of everything that changed every frame, every, you know, 10th of a second, every 20th or 30th of a second, all of a sudden it starts looking really good. Another thing that they do is they'll interpolate. So what that means is, like in the case of Counter-Strike or TF2, you see a guy running along. That's not really what the networking says is happening. That's not really what the server is telling you. The server is saying, oh, he's here, and now he's here, and now he's here, and now he's here, and by the way, he's running forward. And so if you were just to show that data directly, what you would get is you just see the guy kind of popping around at intervals. It wouldn't necessarily look that interesting or be that compelling. So what games do is they'll actually smooth the data. So they'll say, okay, well, I knew he was here, and now he's going here, so I'll sort of animate him going over there, and then animating him to the next place and the next place. And you know, sometimes you can catch the game out. So sometimes if you play games enough, you'll notice, like, you know, if an object suddenly gets in the way or there's suddenly an explosion or something, you might see a guy kind of walking, and then like he'll like sort of fly backwards all of a sudden and then fall from that point, like he'll sort of jerk. And that's a case where the interpolation didn't work right. But they try pretty hard to keep the interpolation good.
Might still be there, where just people would randomly interpolate all the way across the map. You just see like a heavy guy went for like 1 frame, and you think maybe I hallucinated that. Like, it was totally happening.
Yeah. So you know, these are the sorts of things that happen, and it's really interesting looking at that. And there's also prediction. Like suppose I'm playing the game, and I don't get packets for a little bit. So one thing I could do as a client is I could just be like, whoa, no packets, guys. We're done. Everything stops, right? Which at some point you may have to do that because, you know, if you get far enough out of sync, then it's probably bad to have the player think that they're doing really well because everybody stopped moving and they're killing them. Like it's probably better to just be like, okay, like, you know, server like connection lost or packet lost or something. But if you lose just 1, you don't really want to do that, or 2, you know. I mean, maybe that's 200, you know, a quarter of a second of gameplay. Like it's not that big of a deal if things going to snap back into place after that. So what will happen is the game will predict forward based on what it knows to sort of provide a continuous game experience until data resumes. And so that kind of allows you to fill in the gaps. So even if you have a really bad connection, and these are all techniques that were developed in the 90s or before to play over modems and really bad connections. And so they've only sort of gotten better over the years as the network has gotten better. You'd be on a modem, maybe it rains, the line gets a little noisy, all of a sudden you're losing packets, and the game can still be played because it's resending data and it knows what you got, and it's able to sort of fill in the blanks enough that the game is still mostly playable. I mean, you're probably not going to be setting any records, but at least you can be in the game and have a good time, even over a less than great experience. So that's sort of the prediction and interpolation side of things. So questions, what can I talk about for you guys? Now I've kind of laid out like the really high level stuff. Yeah?
Tick rate. Tick rate, like how many updates a second the server is going through. I just recently went into Battlefield's on by default. Battlefield games are going to 10, which is probably why they don't have a competitive scene.
Yeah, that's certainly plausible, yeah. I've seen, a lot of different games will run ticks in different ways. So in the game world, in gaming games, a tick is the notion of, you have a logic that's going to update the game world, move everything around. How fast do you run it? And typically they'll group it into a tick, and every time you run a tick, the world changes a little bit. Gravity is applied, damage is taken, objects move, everything happens. And so some games run at a really low tick rate, some games run at a really high tick rate, and they may vary at different times. Most network games will run at a fixed tick rate, which means they always do the same number of ticks every second, no matter what. Like maybe they'll choose 30, maybe they'll choose 10. In a game like Minecraft, I think ticks are not that often. In a game like Quake or something, or Call of Duty, it's going to be pretty high rate. League of Legends also runs, I think, at a relatively high tick rate. It's I guess it's an interesting thing because it does depend a lot on the game and how the game logic works, and it isn't necessarily correlated. Like a higher tick rate isn't necessarily better, but it can be better, and it depends on the kind of game. So like with torque games and a lot of the games I've worked with, we always ran them at a 32 ticks per second rate because that sort of divides things up in a nice way. Wake up, and so that was kind of a good way to go. Some games run at variable tick rates. They'll say instead of every 32nd of a second an update, they'll say whenever we feel like it. Could be 10th of a second, could be 50th of a second, like whatever. And that has problems because when you start updating stuff like physics, it can get really unhappy if you update that at an uneven rate. You can get into a lot of issues where stuff was resting on the floor and now it's vibrating violently and now it's falling through objects and that kind of thing. So you usually want to sort of stay with a fixed tick rate. But turning it up really high can be a disservice because then you're doing a lot of work you're still doing about the same amount of work every tick, but you're not changing the game world. So you're doing a ton of extra work. So like if you look at, when I was researching this talk, it's like you go look at the Counter-Strike things and they're like, oh, there's a tick rate setting. And so there's always some guy who's like, oh man, you just set your tick rate to like 2,000 and then it's awesome, right? And in reality, it's not, because what happens is you send a ton of packets that you can't deliver 2,000 packets a second over most networks, especially not to 16 players. And it also can introduce numerical issues where it's like you're dividing stuff too finely, and so the math gets weird. And then all of a sudden, you're also wondering, like, why is my server taking up my whole whole CPU instead of like a tiny fraction of it? But yeah, I would say a tick rate of 10 is probably pretty low. Like I would think like at minimum, maybe you'd want like a 16 or 32. One thing that's interesting if you ever, have copious free time to play with this kind of thing is if you do have a game and you adjust the tick rate, it is really interesting seeing how it plays differently at different rates. And it may even look the same, but if you take it down to a 10 hertz tick rate, you'll really notice it. And similarly, if you can get to 60 or higher, that can also make a really big difference. And I think the gold standard these days is like if you can be at 60 all the time, like that's really good. It feels good. It feels really responsive. You may not network things at an update rate of 60 packets a second, but you may run the game at 60 ticks a second, and it can feel really really good. Whereas like 30 is like pretty decent, but I know we did some tests with Blockland. Blockland runs at 30, and we bumped it up to 60, and it did it feels more responsive. Like it feels better. But there's some trade-offs that are kind of ugly, so we ended up not keeping that. So that's kind of tick rate. Any other questions?
What would be a good library, a good application to get started on?
Well, TNL obviously is super awesome. Yeah, TNL is actually really, at this point, I don't know, it is really good code, and I developed that with Mark Frontmeyer. He was the lead developer on that. Super talented guy, really, really neat code. Like if you are into reading neat code, like definitely give it a read. It hasn't been updated in a long time. I would say, code bases to look at in this. Sources networking library it's not a standalone library. The way they do networking is really mature. I checked that out. Like RackNet is a really good library. And then if you want to get a little deeper into it, Glenn Fiedler, his blog is Gaffron Games. He's a friend of mine, and he's done some really awesome networked physics talks at GDC over the years. And he has some fantastic stuff on his blog that kind of walks you through the whole thing, and he has example implementations of it and so forth that kind of really get into the meat of it and how it all works. So those are the resources I would think. And I think Unity uses RackNet, so for those of you who are Unity devs, you can build on that. But good networking always takes a lot of tuning, so I would never assume that just because you have a good library, you'll get good results. Like you kind of have to understand, it's like playing the guitar or something, right? Like you might have really nice equipment, but you still have to know what you're doing to get good results. So something to keep in mind. Do you have a thought?
It's important to mention that like the prediction stuff in Counter-Strike was invented after the Torch library came out, and it's more of a, I was going to say, if you do that prediction stuff, like it's like that, you have like, it could be 500 milliseconds, so it's like, I ran down the street, got in the car, and then as it got killed. 500 milliseconds go. Yeah. So like, they brought that out, and as broadband started to roll out, that became impossible to do that sort of tighter prediction. And then like Torque is really designed for everyone's on a dial-up modem, and you want to have 64 players, so do some like, it's things are a little bit jonky, and it shows you that, so you know what's going on in the world.
Yeah, and things definitely get jonky with 64 or under 28 players. Yeah, Torque did not have, I don't know if it currently has the lag compensation stuff in it, but it didn't for a long time. And it was interesting because what would happen is, like, suppose you were flying through the air or something, you're moving in a dynamic way. Your player would only update when new moves came from the client. So we keep track of, like, are you moving left, are you moving right, like, how do you want to move in the world? And then it would send that to the server as well as simulating it locally so that you would feel like you were moving instantly, but the server was always staying in sync and kind of keeping up with you. And I see I'm in my last 5 minutes, so I'll probably wrap up after one more question. The game logic for the player wouldn't advance if there weren't moves for him. So if you were playing against somebody who was on a modem that would like drop packets or have other weird behavior, you would see them flying through the air, and then they would stop for a little bit while packets were lost for them. And then when packets came back, then they would finish falling. And so there were just like weird, weird reality bending things that would happen in the quest to sort of have the game play well. And I think that was actually something that people could exploit a little bit to get an advantage because you could stop your movement and sort of do weird stuff. So it wasn't unknown to hear about guys who would have the phone off the hook while they were playing the game and like blow into it when they wanted this to happen, and it would impact how the game was played. And then of course you stop blowing and then the connection resumes and you'd pick back up. So. With broadband, it's, you can't like unplug the coax cable and blow in it and have anything happen. So it's not as much of an issue. But back in the day, it was a big problem. And that was one thing I think that led to Counter-Strike being so competitive, was that they did have this lag compensation stuff that really evened out the playing field in a relatively consistent way.
And prior to that, that sort of naive networking where when you click a button, it would be a delay, and then you would shoot. And if you were on broadband, you could actually send packets faster, so certain weapons could actually shoot faster.
Yeah.
Remember that? That was awesome.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Well, let's ask a question that I said you'd be comfortable mentioning. Different network model, just briefly, say how RTS games tended to work, such as StarCraft, Age of Empires was one of the
Absolutely, I will do that. I will give you the 1 minute rundown of that. So I alluded to in Torque that you would send moves to a player, and that would control how they moved. And then also Torque would also send a lot of updates about the world and how everything was moving and behaving, and that would all sort of sync up, right? Okay, so in the case of like an RTS game where, say, all unit movement could be determined up front without any input from the server, what you could do is basically send the equivalent of the mouse clicks of each player to the server and to all the other players, and then everything would just magically stay in sync, assuming the coders did a really good job. So like if you're playing StarCraft and you're like, okay, you 10 Zerg, run over here, all it really needs to do is be like, U10 run over here, and then everybody can kind of work out the same stuff. And they'll all move the same way and look the same way, and everybody will be in sync. And it takes a minuscule amount of bandwidth, because instead of keeping the state of 1,000 units running around in sync, which is a lot of data, you have like, I clicked here, I clicked here, I clicked here, and even if you're Korean and you have 200 actions per minute and you're like using shortcut keys and stuff, you really can't saturate, you can't run out of bandwidth for that. And actually, I did an RTS kit for Torque that worked that way, and it was really fun to work on, although I don't know that, I think maybe somebody did a game on it at some point. I don't know, but it was still a lot of fun to do. Originally, it was supposed to be a turn-based strategy kit, but we decided RTS was better. So anyway, thank you so much for coming to my talk. I appreciate it. I hope it was enlightening. If you want to hit me up on Twitter or email with your networking questions, please feel free. If you are an awesome programmer and looking for a job, we are looking for programmers at the Engine Co. So shoot me an email with your resume. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.